I keep a specific knife on my nightstand. Not a hunting knife. Not a tactical blade. A simple folding knife with a worn wooden handle that belonged to my father, and before him, to his father. My wife asked me about it once, maybe 3 years into our marriage. I told her it was sentimental. She accepted that and never asked again. It isn't sentimental. I keep it because of what happened in the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana in the fall of 2019. Because of what came to my door at 3 in the morning on the 7th night of elk season. Because of what it told me, not in words, not exactly, but in the way it stood there, massive and wrong and trembling with something I had never seen on a creature like that before. Fear. The Alpha Werewolf that came to my door at 3 in the morning was afraid. And whatever it was afraid of, whatever had come up into those mountains behind it, that is why I keep the knife. That is why I check the tree line every night before I lock the door. That is why I have not hunted above 8,000 feet since. Some things in these mountains have been here longer than anything we have a name for. The werewolves, as it turns out, are not the oldest of them. The Bitterroot Valley runs along the Idaho-Montana border like a long exhale, wide and flat on the valley floor, flanked on both sides by mountains that climb fast and hard into country that does not care about you. I had hunted the Bitterroot National Forest for 11 years by the time this happened. My father hunted it before me. His father filed a mining claim in the Upper Selway Drainage in 1961 and spent 3 seasons up there before he came back down and never talked about why he stopped. We thought it was his knees. I know now it wasn't his knees. The specific drainage I was hunting is called Cold Creek, which feeds into the main fork of the Bitterroot River about 12 miles south of Hamilton, Montana. Cold Creek Canyon runs northeast, steep on both sides, with a flat bench about 1.5 miles up from the trailhead, where the elk come down to water in early morning. I had taken 3 bulls off that bench over 11 years. I knew every rock on that trail. The cabin I stayed in wasn't mine. It belonged to a man named Gerald Pease, who had been my father's hunting partner for 20 years before my father died and had transferred the privilege of using it to me without ceremony. One phone call. He said, "It's yours if you want it." I said yes before he finished the sentence. Gerald had built it himself in the early 90s. Single room, wood stove, metal roof that sang in the rain, one window facing east toward the ridgeline, and one facing west down toward the creek bottom. It sat at 6,200 feet, above the last reliable cell service but below the timberline, surrounded by Engelmann spruce that had been growing there since before Montana was a state. The cabin smelled like wood smoke and linseed oil, and the specific cold that lives inside old wood long after the fire goes out. That smell is one of the things I loved most about going up there. 11 years of September mornings, coffee on the wood stove, light coming sideways through the spruce, elk bugling somewhere up the drainage. It is a beautiful place. It is beautiful the way very old things are beautiful, with something behind the beauty that you can sense, but cannot name. The kind of beautiful that makes the hair on your arms stand up on the 3rd morning for no reason you can explain. Gerald had told me once, sitting on the cabin porch at dusk, watching the shadows come down the east ridge, that the Salish people who had lived in this valley for centuries had a specific word for the upper drainages above 7,000 feet. He didn't know the word, but he said his understanding of it was something close to the country where the agreements are different. I had thought that was poetic. I did not think it was a warning. I was wrong. Gerald called me 2 days before I left for the cabin that September. Not to wish me luck. To tell me something he said he should have told me years ago, and hadn't, because he hadn't wanted to sound like a crazy old man. I had never heard Gerald Pease sound uncertain about anything in my life. He was 74 years old, and had spent 50 of them in those mountains. When he started talking, I sat down. He said, "There are rules for that drainage. Rules my father told me, and his father told him, and I've followed them every year for 40 years, without incident. I'm telling you because you're going up alone this year, and you need to know them before you go. Rule 1. You do not go above 8,000 feet after dark, not for a wounded animal, not for any reason. If you're above 8,000 at last light, you move downhill immediately, and you move fast. You do not stop to glass. You do not make noise. You move down. I asked why. He said, just write them down. Rule 2. If you hear something moving through the timber that you cannot identify, something that sounds too heavy for deer and too quiet for elk, you stop moving and you sit down against a tree, and you do not look for it. You look at the ground. You wait until the sound is gone. Then you go down. Rule 3. You do not leave food outside the cabin. Not scraps. Not anything. What's in the cooler stays in the cooler inside the cabin, not on the porch, not tied to a tree. Inside. Rule 4. If you wake up between 2 and 4 in the morning, and you hear something outside, make something moving, something at the woodpile, something on the porch, you do not turn on a light. You do not open the door. You lie still, and you let it do whatever it's doing, and you wait for it to stop. It will stop. I asked what it was. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Rule 5 is the most important one, so I need you to listen carefully. Rule 5. If something comes to the cabin door at night, and it knocks, if it knocks like a person, deliberately, 3 times or more, you do not open the door. You do not answer, under any circumstances. I don't care what you hear after the knocking. I don't care what it sounds like. You do not open that door until full daylight. I said, Gerald, what is knocking on cabin doors at 9,000 feet in the Bitterroot? He said, I've been going up there for 40 years, and I've followed those rules for 40 years, and I've never had to find out. Your grandfather went up there and didn't follow them, and he came home and never went back. I'm asking you to follow them. I told him I would. I almost kept that promise. The second night in the cabin, with elk meat thawing in the cooler and a fire going low in the stove, Gerald called on the satellite communicator I'd brought and told me about a man named Walt Corrigan. Walt had been a Forest Service trail crew foreman who'd worked the Cold Creek drainage in the late 80s. Good man, Gerald said. Big, capable, not the kind of man who spooked easy. He'd spent 30 nights in that drainage over 3 seasons, usually alone, and he'd been fine. The summer of 1988, he'd taken his teenage son up for a week of backpacking, kid named Danny, 16 years old. Third night out, they'd camped at a lake above 8,000 feet, above where they should have been after dark, but they'd pushed too hard and the light went before they could get down. Walt knew the rules. He'd decided the lake was defensible enough. He built a fire. He kept it going all night. Gerald's voice on the communicator was flat and careful, the way voices get when someone is telling something they have told before and still haven't made peace with. He said, in the morning, Walt was at the lake. Danny wasn't. No sign of struggle. No blood. No tracks leading away from camp. Walt's pack had been moved about 6 feet from where he'd placed it. His rifle was on the other side of the fire from where he'd set it. Walt himself was sitting up against a tree with no memory of the night after about 11 p.m. Danny Corrigan has never been found. The official report says lost hiker, presumed dead. Walt Corrigan quit the Forest Service that winter and moved to Arizona and refused to talk about it for the rest of his life. He died in 2011. Gerald said, Walt told my father one thing only, about 10 years after it happened, over bourbon at a hunting camp in the Bitterroots. He said that sometime in the night, he didn't know what time, he had woken up to the sound of something at the edge of the firelight. Not in the firelight, at the edge of it. He said it was standing there, the way a man stands. But it wasn't a man. He said it was looking at Danny. He said it looked like it was deciding something. I lay in my sleeping bag after that call and listened to the creek running below the cabin and looked at the ceiling and told myself that Walt Corrigan's son had gotten lost in the dark and fallen into a drainage somewhere, and that was a tragedy, but it wasn't supernatural. I told myself that for 4 more days. Days 3 through 6 were exactly what they should have been. I was up before light, on the bench by first gray, watching elk come down off the ridge into the creek bottom. I passed on 2 cows and a small bull, waiting for the kind of shot my father had taught me. Certain, clean, no tracking a wounded animal into the dark. I followed every rule without thinking much about them. It wasn't hard. The rules were sensible. The rules felt like the kind of thing experienced mountain men naturally did. On the 5th day, I had a 7x7 bull at 60 yards broadside at 8 in the morning, and I shot him clean and had him quartered and in the cooler by 2 in the afternoon. A perfect day. The kind of day that makes you understand why people keep coming back to places like this. That night, I ate elk backstrap cooked in butter on the wood stove and called my wife on the communicator and told her the trip had been perfect and I'd be home in 2 days. I went to sleep satisfied and comfortable and entirely certain that Gerald Pease was a good man who had spent too many years alone in the mountains and had developed the kind of relationship with the dark that solitude produces in certain people. I thought that until 3:14 in the morning on the 7th day. I woke up to the sound of something moving outside the cabin. Heavy. Not elk heavy. Not bear heavy. Something heavier than both. Moving with a deliberateness that elk and bears do not have. Stopping and starting in a pattern that felt intentional. Felt like something that was checking the perimeter of the cabin the way you'd check the perimeter of something you'd encountered before and needed to assess. I lay still. I followed Rule 4 without deciding to. My body followed it before my brain engaged. Then I heard it. 3 knocks at the cabin door. Deliberate. Spaced. Not the random contact of an animal investigating. 3 knocks, the way a person knocks when they need to be heard. I did not move. Then something happened that Gerald's rules had not prepared me for. After the 3 knocks, silence. And then a sound that I cannot fully describe and have spent 4 years trying to describe, and the best I can do is this. It was a sound between a growl and something else. Something with register and pattern. Something that was not language and was not animal. Something that was trying to be one and was the other, and was attempting a translation across a distance so vast it should not have been crossable. It was not threatening. It was urgent, and underneath the urgency was something I had no framework for. It was desperate. I sat up. I told myself not to. I sat up anyway. I put my hand on Gerald's folding knife on the bedside shelf. I went to the door. I did not open the door immediately. I stood with my hand on the interior latch and listened. The sound had stopped when I moved. It knew I was at the door. The silence on the other side had weight to it. The specific quality of a silence made by something that is aware of you and has stopped in response to your movement. I could hear breathing. Not through the door. The door was solid pine 2 inches thick. I could hear it through the wall, through the logs, the way you hear bass frequencies through materials that should block them. Low, rhythmic, enormous. The breathing of something with a chest cavity the size of a refrigerator. Something that was managing its own breathing deliberately. Controlling it. I said through the door, "What do you want?" The breathing changed, shortened. Like something had reacted to my voice with the specific change you make when you've been waiting for a signal and it finally comes. Then the sound again, that almost language. Closer now. I could feel the vibration of it in the door itself. I opened the door. I cannot fully justify why I opened the door. I can tell you what it felt like. It felt like the thing on the other side of the door was not trying to get in. It was trying to get me to come out. It was trying to show me something. The porch light had burned out 2 days earlier, and I hadn't replaced it. The moon was 3/4 full, and the clearing in front of the cabin was silver and gray and sharp-shadowed in a way that made things visible but wrong, distances compressed, edges uncertain. It was standing at the edge of the porch. Not on the porch, at the edge of it, in the clearing, at the bottom of the 2 steps. 7 feet, maybe 7.5. Shoulders that framed a body that made no architectural sense. Forward-weighted, long in the arm, built for speed in a way that something that size should not be built for speed. The head was wrong in the way that things are wrong when you see them, and your brain tries to assign category and cannot. Heavy brow. Eyes that caught the moonlight the way no dog's eyes should catch moonlight. Not reflective, not tapetum glow, but illuminated, as if the light were coming from within. It was looking at me, and it was shaking, not with cold, not with threat display, the specific fine tremor of an animal under severe stress. The kind of shaking that happens when something that does not experience fear encounters something it is afraid of. It turned its head toward the upper drainage, toward the country above 8,000 feet, toward the darkness above the timberline where the ridge went up into rock and open sky. And it made the sound again, that almost language. And this time I understood something that had no words, that arrived as understanding without the mediation of language, the way cold arrives, the way darkness arrives. Go down. It was not a warning for its own sake. It had come down from above 8,000 feet to deliver it. Something had driven it down. Then I heard it. From up the drainage, from high in the dark above the timberline, a sound that the werewolf's presence had been masking the way a nearer sound masks a farther one. A silence that was not silence. A pressure in the air moving downhill, something descending. The werewolf did not wait. It moved, sideways, into the spruce, fast and nearly silent for its size, gone in 3 seconds. In its absence, the clearing felt different, felt exposed, felt like a lit window in a dark street. I went back inside. I locked the door. I put the knife in my hand. I sat in the dark and listened to whatever was moving down the drainage. It reached the cabin at 4:17 in the morning. I know the time because I was watching the clock on my satellite communicator, unable to look away from the numbers, anchoring myself to something ordinary while the ordinary world evaporated around me. It did not knock. It stood outside the cabin and it was still, and the stillness of it was the worst thing I have ever experienced. Not the sound of it, the absence of sound. The way the creak, which I had fallen asleep to every night for 6 nights, simply stopped registering. The way the wind through the spruce stopped. The way the world contracted to the size of one log cabin in the dark, and everything outside that cabin became something else. I could smell it through the walls. This is the part I least expect people to believe, and the part I am most certain of. I could smell it through 2-inch pine logs and insulation and everything else between me and the outside air. Cold stone. Something older than cold stone. An atmosphere of geological time. The way standing inside a cave that hasn't seen air movement in 10,000 years carries the accumulated cold of 10,000 winters. It smelled like the mountain itself had developed an awareness and was testing the edges of the cabin to see what was inside. I did not breathe. I sat against the back wall, the wall furthest from the door and both windows, with Gerald's knife open in my hand, and I understood with total clarity that the knife was meaningless, and that I was holding it anyway because humans hold things when they have nothing else, and it was all I had. The east window, the one facing the ridge, went dark. Not dark like the light changed. Dark like something was standing in front of it, something that filled the window frame. I could see the outline of it in the remaining moonlight. The shape of it. The wrong shape of it. Not the werewolf's shape. Different. Older. Lower to the ground and wider in a way that communicated mass beyond what shape should be able to communicate. It pressed against the window glass, and the glass did not break, and I do not know why the glass did not break. It waited. I sat. It waited longer than anything patient has ever waited, sometime before first light. I cannot tell you exactly when. The pressure changed. The smell faded. The creek started running again. The window cleared. I sat in the same position until gray light began showing at the edges of the east window, and then I sat for another hour after that. When I finally moved, my legs had cramped so severely I had to pull myself upright using the stove. I packed in 45 minutes. I left the elk quarters in the cooler. I left them. I was outside on the trail in the dark of early morning, moving downhill, following Rule 1 4 hours after I should have. I called Gerald from the trailhead, 7 in the morning. He answered before the second ring. I told him what happened. All of it. The werewolf. The warning. What came after. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "My father told me once that the things above 8,000 feet in the Bitterroot have a hierarchy. He said the wolves, the big ones, the changed ones, they're territorial at their level. They hold the country between 6 and 8,000 feet. They have for a long time. What's above 8,000? What lives above the timber line and the rock and the dark? They don't have a word for that. My father said, "The wolves know enough to be afraid of it, and that should be enough for us." I said, "What is it?" Gerald said, "I don't know. My father didn't know. But he told me something your grandfather told him after that last season, when he came back down and never went back up. He said your grandfather told him, and this was the only thing he ever said about why he stopped going up there. He said, it's been in those mountains since before the mountains were mountains, and sometimes it comes down to look at what's moved in." I asked what had saved me. Gerald said, "I've been thinking about that. I think the rules aren't for keeping you safe from what's up there. I think they're for keeping you invisible. No food outside, no light, no going up into its country, no answering the door. All of it is about not broadcasting yourself, about making whatever is up there uncertain whether you're there at all." I said, "The werewolf was visible. It was outside. It knocked on the door." Gerald said, "I know." He paused. He said, "I think it was above 8,000 when it sensed what was coming down. I think it came to the nearest shelter, and I think it warned you the only way it could, because what was coming for both of you. And I think when you stayed dark, no light, no sound, it had nothing to follow." He paused again. He said, "I think the rules protected you both. I have the knife on my nightstand. I keep it there not because a folding knife would do anything against what I saw in the east window that night, and not because I believe whatever came down that drainage has followed me 300 miles south to the house where I now live. I keep it because it was my grandfather's, and it was his father's before him, and now I understand that my grandfather's rule, the one he never spoke aloud, the one he kept by simply never going back, was the same rule the Bitterroot drainage had been enforcing for as long as people had been going up there. Go below 8,000. Stay below 8,000. Do not make yourself visible to what lives in the high dark. I keep the knife because it is the one object that connects me to every man in my family who understood, without being able to say it directly, that there are levels to these mountains. That the agreements are different up there, that some of what lives in the high country has been there since before the mountains had a name, and that the best outcome, the only outcome the rules have ever reliably produced, is that it remains uncertain you exist. The elk I left in that cooler is still on my conscience. The window that went dark is still on something else entirely. It has been 4 years since that morning on the Cold Creek trailhead. I've hunted the Bitterroot every year since, in the lower drainage, below 6,000 feet, out before last light, no food outside, no lights at the windows after 10, following every rule. The knife on the nightstand is there because I still check the tree line every night before I lock the door, and because some mornings, in the hour before first light, when the neighborhood is quiet and the dark outside the bedroom window has that particular quality of weight and attention, I think about the east window going dark, and I am grateful for whatever decided 4 years ago that I wasn't worth the trip down so far.